The sound of steel tracks grinding against the earth is something you never forget. It rattled through my bones as the M4 Sherman crept forward, its engine growling like a beast straining to break free. Inside the cramped steel belly of that machine, 5 of us sat shoulder to shoulder, each man carrying the same fear, but bound together by the same duty. The smell of oil, smoke, and sweat filled the air, and in those moments, the Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was our home, our shield, and sometimes our coffin. For many Americans, the Sherman is just a name in a history book, a grainy black and white photograph, or a relic standing silent in a museum. But for those of us who rode inside her, she was alive. She shook, she roared, she burned when hit, and she carried us through fields of mud, through hedgerows, through the rubble of bombed-out towns across Europe and the Pacific. This is not just the story of a machine. It is the story of ordinary men in extraordinary times, men who fought, bled, and sometimes never came home. To understand what the Sherman meant, you have to step inside with us, feel the steel walls pressing in, and listen to the heartbeat of a generation at war. When America first entered the war, we were not ready for the storm that awaited us. Our soldiers were brave, but the machines they carried into battle were outdated. In the deserts of North Africa and across Europe, German panzers prowled with speed and power, their armor thick, their guns devastating. The United States needed something new, something that could be built quickly, repaired easily, and produced in numbers so great that no enemy could match it. The answer was the M4 Sherman. It was not designed to be the heaviest or the deadliest tank on the battlefield. Instead, it was designed to be the soldier's tank, simple enough for young men barely out of high school to operate, rugged enough to keep moving when conditions turned to chaos, and cheap enough that America's factories could roll them out by the tens of thousands. It was, in every sense, a tank built for the common man. Compared to the massive German Tigers and Panthers, the Sherman seemed modest. Its armor could be pierced, its gun often outmatched, yet where the Sherman truly shined was in what it represented: the strength of American industry, the belief that quantity and reliability could stand against brute force. From the moment it left the factory floor, the Sherman carried not just steel and firepower, but the determination of a nation rising to meet its greatest challenge. And soon, this tank would be tested in the harshest of classrooms, the deserts of North Africa. The deserts of North Africa were the first true proving ground for the Sherman. When it arrived in late 1942, the war there had already become a desperate tug of war. Rommel's Africa Corps had driven the British deep into the sands, their panzers cutting through Allied armor with ruthless efficiency. Into this crucible rolled the Sherman, still untested, still carrying the hopes of American industry and the lives of the young crews who would fight inside her. The desert was a cruel teacher. The heat was suffocating, the sand choked engines and jammed weapons, and visibility stretched for miles with no cover to hide behind. In those vast open fields, battles were often decided by who spotted the other first. The Sherman faced off against Panzer III and IV tanks, machines that had already tasted victory across Europe. At first, it was uncertain whether the Sherman could hold its own. Soldiers who climbed inside her steel frame wondered if this new tank would protect them or become just another coffin of fire and smoke. What they discovered, however, was that the Sherman was reliable in ways that mattered most. When the heat scorched and the dust clogged every machine, the Sherman kept running. When a track was blown apart, her crew could repair it in the field, sometimes in hours, and return to the fight. Unlike German tanks that demanded constant complex maintenance, the Sherman proved she could endure. And slowly the tide began to shift. At El Alamein, and later in Tunisia, rows of Shermans advanced side by side with British and American troops, turning the sands into a battleground where Germany's invincibility began to crack. It wasn't perfection that made the Sherman succeed. It was her resilience. In North Africa, for the first time, Allied soldiers began to believe that this tank could carry them not just through the desert, but eventually across the continent of Europe. By the summer of 1944, the Sherman had crossed the seas and was ready to face its greatest trial yet, the invasion of Europe. On the morning of June 6th, D-Day, the beaches of Normandy erupted in fire and chaos. Alongside the soldiers storming ashore came the Shermans, some equipped with flotation screens to swim through the surf, others roaring straight off landing craft into the sand. Many never made it past the tide, sinking under German fire. But those that did clawed their way forward became the backbone of the push inland. The hedgerows of Normandy were unlike anything the crews had faced before. Thick earth and tangled roots created natural fortress walls, perfect for German defenders and nearly impossible for tanks to penetrate. For every yard gained, Shermans ground forward under withering fire. They faced the dreaded German Tigers and Panthers, machines whose guns could punch through a Sherman from over a mile away. For the men inside, every encounter with these giants was a moment balanced between life and death. Yet the Sherman had something the Germans could never match: numbers and unity. Where one Sherman fell, 5 more rolled in behind it. Crews adapted, learning to use speed, coordination, and sheer persistence. Infantry fought alongside them, artillery supported them, and above it all, Allied aircraft cleared the skies. Piece by piece, the Shermans helped break the German defenses that had once seemed unshakable. Through the blood-soaked fields and shattered villages of France, the Sherman became a familiar sight, its silhouette a symbol of Allied determination. In every town liberated, children climbed on its armor, and civilians wept at the sight of a machine that meant freedom had returned. For the crews, it was never easy. They knew the risk every time they turned the key, but they also knew they were part of something larger than themselves. From the beaches of Normandy to the rolling fields beyond, the Sherman proved it was not just a tank, it was the instrument of liberation. It carried men through fear, through fire, and into the heart of occupied Europe, where the dream of breaking Nazi tyranny was no longer a hope, but a reality taking shape 1 mile at a time. What made the Sherman truly remarkable was not only the sheer number of tanks produced, but the way it could be adapted into so many different forms. No other tank of the war transformed itself to meet the needs of every battlefield, quite like the M4. Wherever the Allies fought, there seemed to be a Sherman tailored for the challenge. Perhaps the most famous of these was the British-modified Sherman Firefly. Knowing that the standard 75mm gun often could not penetrate the armor of Tigers and Panthers, British engineers mounted their powerful 17-pounder gun onto the Sherman's turret. The result was a tank that finally gave Allied crews the ability to face German heavy armor with confidence. Fireflies became feared opponents, capable of knocking out even the most dreaded Tiger tanks at long range. For the men inside, it meant a fighting chance where before there had only been dread. Then there were the amphibious DD Shermans, short for duplex drive. Fitted with canvas flotation screens and twin propellers, they were designed to swim ashore during the Normandy landings. It was a daring idea, sending steel machines to float like boats, and not all of them survived the rough seas. Yet those that reached the beaches provided the firepower desperately needed to push through the Atlantic Wall. For the infantry pinned down by German guns, the sight of a Sherman crawling up from the surf was more than steel. It was salvation. Other variants carried even more terrifying roles. The Sherman Crocodile replaced its machine gun with a flamethrower, spewing fire into bunkers and trenches, forcing defenders to abandon their positions. To the men who operated them, it was a grim weapon, but one that saved countless Allied lives in the brutal street fighting of Europe. Still others were converted into engineering vehicles, bridge layers, mine clearers, and self-propelled artillery, each one a new tool carved from the same dependable chassis. The lesson was clear. The Sherman was not just one tank, but many. It bent and shifted to the demands of war, proving that versatility could be just as decisive as brute strength. Every variant told a story of adaptation, of ingenuity, and of determination to overcome whatever obstacle lay ahead. And for the soldiers who fought beside them, each version of the Sherman carried a single promise: that no matter the terrain, no matter the enemy, America's tank would always be there to press forward. For all its variations and battlefield achievements, the Sherman was more than steel, gears, and tracks. It had a character of its own, one that every crew came to know intimately. To sit inside was to step into a world of noise and heat. The engine thundered so loud you could barely hear yourself think, and the air was thick with the smell of oil, cordite, and sweat. Space was so tight that knees pressed against armor and elbows knocked against the man beside you. There was no comfort, only duty. Yet within that cramped hull, bonds were forged stronger than armor. A Sherman crew was 5 men: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver. Each depended on the other with absolute trust. The commander's calm voice, the loader's quick hands, the driver's steady grip on the controls, every action meant the difference between survival and destruction. They joked together, argued together, ate from the same rations, and when the shells began to fall, they fought together as one. For all their training, every man carried fear. They knew a Tiger's gun could slice through their armor, that one hit could turn their tank into a blazing tomb. But fear did not paralyze them. Instead, it sharpened their focus because they trusted not in invincibility, but in each other. That trust gave them the courage to keep moving forward when everything in them wanted to turn back. The Sherman may not have been the most powerful tank of the war, but inside it lived the beating hearts of ordinary young Americans thrust into extraordinary circumstances. It was their grit, their faith in one another, that gave the Sherman its true strength. And as the war pushed deeper into Europe, it became clear that this partnership between man and machine was about to face its greatest test yet. The true measure of the Sherman was revealed in the battles that defined the war. After Normandy, its tracks rolled across the French countryside, through narrow villages and wide open fields where freedom had been stolen for 4 long years. In August 1944, Shermans led the charge into Paris, their engines echoing down boulevards once dominated by German troops. For the citizens who rushed into the streets to cheer, climbing onto the tanks and draping them with flags, the Sherman was more than a machine. It was the symbol that liberation had finally arrived. But liberation did not come without cost. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the Sherman faced its most desperate challenge. German forces launched a massive counterattack through the Ardennes, sending Tigers and Panthers into the snowy forests. For the crews inside their Shermans, the odds seemed impossible. Their armor was thin, their guns outmatched, and the winter cold seeped into every crack of steel. Yet, they held. American tankers fought with grit and sacrifice, often ambushing German giants in close quarters where numbers and determination could turn the tide. Many did not return, but their stand in those frozen woods helped break Hitler's last great gamble. The Sherman also proved its worth far from Europe, in the jungles and volcanic islands of the Pacific. On Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Shermans rumbled forward alongside Marines, crushing bunkers and blasting fortified caves. Against fanatical resistance, they became indispensable partners in the relentless drive toward Japan. For the men who clung to them for cover in the chaos of battle, the Sherman was not simply a weapon. It was survival itself. From the heart of Paris to the forests of Belgium and the islands of the Pacific, the Sherman carried Allied soldiers into the fiercest fighting of the war. It was never invulnerable, never flawless, but it was always there. And in those decisive battles, it earned its place not just in military history, but in the memory of a generation who saw it as the steel companion of their fight for freedom. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the Sherman remained. More than 49,000 had been built, a number so vast it staggered even those who commanded them. No other Allied tank rolled off assembly lines with such speed and in such numbers. The Sherman was not just a weapon of war, it was proof of what America's factories, workers, and soldiers could accomplish when united by a single purpose. Its story did not end with the fall of the Third Reich or the surrender of Japan. Shermans continued to serve in armies around the world for decades after the war. From the battlefields of Korea to the Middle East, they carried their legacy forward, often upgraded, repainted, and still stubbornly reliable. Long after the Tiger and Panther had faded into memory, Shermans remained in service, a testament to their durability and adaptability. But the truest legacy of the Sherman lies not in numbers or in foreign service, but in the men who fought inside them. To their generation, the Sherman was the vehicle that carried them from fear to victory, from oppression to liberation. It was never the most glamorous machine, never the most powerful, but it was always enough when it mattered most. For the families who welcomed their sons home, and for the countless towns across Europe and the Pacific that were freed under its tracks, the Sherman became more than steel. It became a promise kept. And that promise, that ordinary strength could achieve extraordinary victory, remains the enduring gift of the M4 Sherman to history. The Sherman story is not just the tale of a machine. It is the story of the men who climbed inside her and never came back, and of those who returned, carrying memories that would never fade. In every battle from the burning deserts to the frozen forests, crews gave everything they had. Many fell before their time, their tanks left smoldering on lonely fields, but their sacrifice carved the path to victory. We remember them not for the steel they fought in, but for the courage that burned brighter than any cannon flash. They were young Americans, sons, brothers, husbands, who faced impossible odds with a stubborn resolve to see freedom endure. To the people of Europe who were liberated, the sight of a Sherman meant salvation. To the families at home, it meant hope that their loved ones might come back alive. The Sherman itself may rest now in museums, monuments, and quiet fields where rust has replaced fire. But its message still speaks. It tells us that greatness is not always about perfection or unmatched power. Sometimes it is about resilience, about ordinary strength repeated thousands of times until it changes the course of history. So when we honor the Sherman, we honor more than a tank. We honor a generation that stood firm when the world was at its breaking point. Their legacy is our freedom, and their story reminds us that even in the darkest hours, courage and unity can light the way forward.